thank you for having me here today. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. And I've had the distinct pleasure of knowing Tova for a number of years when she used to be at the University of Michigan. And that was definitely a game we lost when she moved here to be with you all. But I'm thrilled about the work she's able to carry forward here at the University of Wisconsin. I'm going to start actually with a thank you to those of you who have served and sacrificed, either as service members, currently veterans, children, spouses, grandparents, cousins, you know, the many people who have made sacrifice on behalf of all of us. So it's really a special honor to be giving this talk on Veterans Day. And I just want to honor and thank all of you who have contributed to our nation and to us. So thank you, and I'll start there. I want to share a little about my own background. I personally am a civilian, and I don't have service history of my own. And I think that's important to acknowledge in terms of the work that I have done. I have really benefited from having many close friends, family members who are service connected, who have helped me to learn and understand and grow. And the opportunity to learn and connect with families, with service members and veterans has really richly infused the work. But I suspect that some of you here have perspectives and ways of understanding this based on your own experience. And I hope at the end we'll have some time to talk and do some back and forth so that you can help me continue to learn and grow. I'll share some of what we've learned through our work with families. But I hope you'll also feel comfortable sort of also sharing. Oh, I guess I should say a little more about myself because I wanted you to know. Well, okay, so you haven't served. So how did you come to this work? So I am a clinical and developmental psychologist who had a very sort of long-standing history in young children and how young children develop and grow into productive, contributing members of society. And in that sort of journey, the place that sort of seemed most important to focus on was the early relationships that surround young children as they grow and help them develop the ability to thrive. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about parenting, and particularly parenting under challenge or adversity or stress. How do we sort of help families who experience high levels of chronic ongoing life stress and sort of surmount or manage to thrive in the face of those kinds of challenges? What is it about the families, about the parents, about the context that they're in that helps them to sort of get there? And so in that work began to develop some intervention and preventive intervention models. And as I've been doing this work, had folks sort of say to me, hey, you know, we can think of another population of families who thrive and who are incredibly resilient and can teach us a lot about resilience, but who also face pretty significant challenges in the course of life and experience, and that was military families. And so I was able, with colleagues at the University of Michigan, as they were launching our program, which is called Military Support Programs and Networks, or MSPAN, to really bring a focus on families and children and young children in particular. And that's what I hope to share with you a little bit today. MSPAN is bigger than what I'm going to tell you about today. I'm telling you about my little slice of the pie. MSPAN also provides peer-to-peer programs for veterans, our buddy-to-buddy program, spousal support programs, all sorts of different programs that are designed to help promote and strengthen mental health, resilience, and functioning of service members, veterans, and their families. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research. Why focus on military families? I want to also sort of spend a little time saying why focus on young children in particular, and then to illustrate our work with military families, telling you a little bit about our Strong Military Families program. And part of why I want to do that, I'll just let you know, is because I think there will be opportunities to run these kinds of family programs and groups here in Madison and in Wisconsin, and Tova will be leading the charge in that regard. And so it'll be good to know about it, to be aware, and to sort of help think collectively about, is there a place for this in Wisconsin? And if so, you know, how and where and who might benefit. I will share with you my take-home points right now because I find it is helpful to everyone, myself included, if we know where I'm going. And because I'm hoping that in telling you this, as we go through, you will also feel like, yep, okay, we got that. Couple of things that I think are really, really important. One is an appreciation for the growing number of military and veteran families in our communities. And in particular, I would speak to the veteran families. As the DoD is engaged in downsizing, we have more and more veterans who are disconnected from service, who are moving into civilian communities and may or may not be identified by their neighbors, their schools, their health providers, their colleagues at work as having served. And that's a pretty radical transformation in life experience and something that I'm hoping we will be increasingly aware of, attending to, even if it's only just asking the question. Because very few organizations or systems ask the question, have you served? Has someone in your family or close to you served? The second take home that I hope you will sort of leave with is that military kids are resilient. These kids, navigate enormous challenge. Oftentimes, I think active duty kids on average move 9 times in their life. It's pretty in their childhood. That's a lot of moving. I don't know how many of you have had that experience, but when I sort of imagine that for myself, it's pretty significant. And manage and negotiate separations for brief periods of time and for longer periods of time, sometimes under enormous stress. And yet, the majority are doing very well. Like, what incredible resilience and how much we can learn from families to understand how does that happen, how is that promoted. At the same time, we would be doing a disservice if we didn't attend to the challenge that it presents. And pretty consistent data tell us that about 1 in 3 kids in military families are experiencing elevated symptoms themselves that suggest this might be a kiddo who needs a little bit of extra support, or a family that needs a little bit of extra support to meet their kiddo's needs as they're navigating these challenges and these journeys. And with that in mind, I'm hoping that you'll leave with not, this is one answer to how to meet all the need, because it's not. I'm going to sort of say that now. We really need to work together to identify creative, effective, innovative ways to reach and engage military and veteran families, including children and spouses. And I think your charge in Wisconsin is not that dissimilar from our charge in Michigan, in that you are predominantly a Guard and Reserve state, and the reserve component shares one thing, which is, a lot of geographic dispersion. And that means often having to really think creatively about how do we reach, how do we engage, how do we provide support, service, and access to families who are spread out over wide geographic regions. All right. There are pressing needs. What we know is actually that since 9/11, there are several million American troops who have deployed, and that it's not just about one deployment, but that actually, the sizable number are serving more than one tour, 2 or more tours. And many of the folks who deploy do return with mental health symptoms, high levels of stress, or challenges that they face on reintegration. And we know that family members also face challenges. They may struggle to sort of navigate life while their family member is deployed, and also renegotiating roles and supporting reentry on return presents new challenges as well. We're pretty aware of the fact that communities do not have programs or trained providers to meet all of these needs. So this is a big sort of capacity building need that we have. Specifically to the Guard and Reserve, this has been the largest deployment since World War II. It is interesting to me that Guard and Reserve constitute between 35 to 40% of all troops who deployed post 9/11. It's pretty substantial. In Michigan alone, there are over 21,000 troops who have deployed since 9/11. It's interesting, I don't know the stats here in Wisconsin, but what I can tell you in Michigan is people who aren't a part of this world don't walk around thinking about what a big presence Michigan has in the service. And yet we are 9th in the nation in terms of number of folks who have served. And I would challenge you to find out what that number is for Wisconsin, because it really does, I think, create a disparity in terms of numbers of people who have made this kind of sacrifice or shared experience, but not recognized in their communities. The reserve component often faces unique challenges, balancing civilian and military life, geographic dispersal and isolation. Resources, therefore, are less available, and also facing employment and financial issues. And I'm going to say a little bit more about each of those things in a little while. I want to cite, however, I don't know if any of you have read Thank You for Your Service by David Finkel. He spent some time, he was a journalist, he was embedded in Baghdad, and he had a lot to say about the experience of the soldiers that he worked with. And one of the lines from his book that I really appreciated was, most are okay and some are not. And I think that kind of captures what I've heard from the service members and veterans themselves about their experience and their experience with buddies. The point being that, it's about being there, but it's also about the journey when you come back, when you come home, and navigating re-entry into the civilian world and civilian community after you've experienced something so profound as deployment in wartime.
When you say okay, are you speaking in terms of mental health? Or?
What do you think? Yeah, I think you could apply that how you want to. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to answer that for you, but instead sort of challenge us to sort of think about what could that mean, right? And also, is it fixed? Like, could it change at different times with different experiences? Might new sort of things come up or get better or harder at different points in life, right? But I think what it speaks to is both the resilience side, for me, what I take from that quote, is really underscoring the tremendous resilience that exists, but acknowledging also the hardship and the toll, and not denying that. And I think this to me seems really important in work within the military context, because I think, if we focus too much on the problems, which is what often happens in the popular press and media, it's like all about, PTSD, trauma, suicide, which are really important to attend to, but it can leave folks sort of feeling like this is how you're sort of describing our whole experience. So it's really important to sort of have complexity and focus on the resilience, which is also very evident. On the flip side, we don't want to deny the challenges that folks are facing, right? So how do we create space for both? That we can be strong and resilient and also have challenges and struggles. This is a photograph by Jennifer Carity. Has anyone ever seen her work before? Okay, she is fantastic. I encourage you to write her name down and go to her website. Because what she does is so cool. What she does is she actually interviews veterans about an important moment in their life around their deployment and how it affected them, and she really gets into the details of their story. And then she helps them to basically create a photograph that captures all the elements of their story. And they engage family members and neighbors and other people in the community to essentially compose a photograph that sort of tells something about their experience. And here, I think we can see quite a lot about what this gentleman is experiencing. I don't know if anyone wants to throw out a few things that you notice. What stands out to you?
He's well prepared.
Well prepared for
any eventuality.
Yeah, well prepared for any eventuality. What else?
Alcohol.
Alcohol. Yeah.
It looks like the people in the window are likely people he cares about as opposed to people he feels threatened by.
So it looks like people in the window are people he cares about, not necessarily people he would feel threatened by, but how does he look? Because I agree with you. Yeah.
He looks threatened.
He looks threatened. Yeah. Right.
Away from him.
Yeah. Sort of barricading himself away from the people maybe that he loves, right? And who are watchfully, anxiously looking through the window at him, caring about him. But there's kind of a bunker mentality, bunker really, right there, that's a divide between the family and the soldier. Yeah. Other things that stand out?
He might be either a survivalist or militia member or something.
Yeah, he might have this sort of more survivalist sort of mentality that he's carrying forward with him, malicious. But I guess what I really want to underscore is sort of how, these two worlds collide in the person. that, you come from one set of experiences and then you're in a new environment, new world, and what a difficult sort of journey to sort of integrate those experiences, and how hard it is also for the family. Is sort of, I get drawn through the window to look at this family that's looking on and, sort of kept at a distance, but wants maybe my attribution to be closer in. So, yeah. So the question is, what do we know about, there was more, but I'm going to paraphrase briefly and sort of say that there is a question about what we know historically about the experiences of veterans in former conflicts. And I'm going to give an inadequate answer right now, which is I think we know a lot about what was really different about prior experiences and reintegration. We know in one part what we don't want to do, which is what we did after the Vietnam War, for example, and sort of left generations of families without supports and without sort of community. We know that it looked really different for World War II veterans. But I'm actually not going to go deeply into this, and I'm happy to talk more about it at the end if we have time, but I think you're raising a really important point about the cohort effects, and what does this mean, and how visible or invisible are folks. And the one thing that I want to say to sort of answer that is that about 1% of the population serves currently. And there's an invisibility about that that didn't necessarily exist in World War II, for example. There's a separateness that I think folks feel. And I think that really shapes both experiences during service as well as during the period of reintegration. So I'm happy to talk more, but I'm going to, okay? So. Huh?
Is this scene staged or somebody?
It's staged.
Okay.
It's totally staged.
Okay.
Yep. And so also, I just want to sort of say the quote is, sorry, one second. The quote is, every war has its after war. And I want to share with you how one mom whose spouse deployed described that in her own experience on her husband's return. Her husband was Michigan Army National Guard. And here you'll, get to hear a little bit from her. So I think she speaks very powerfully when she says, war is still in your home. And I think that one of the things that we have heard from families is, it's not going to work if after we come home, it's just thank you for your service and done, right? That we need support, we need ways to navigate reentry in big ways and small, both around renegotiating rules. If one parent has been managing everything when the parent returns, it's a big challenge to sort of balance. How do we now renegotiate, family roles? How do we find reconnect with those that we've been away from, who may or may not even recognize us, right? So this is some of the challenges that we were hearing from families about that experience of coming home, and that's part of what has motivated us to really think about how do we then meet the need? How do we reach out? How do we help fill a gap, perhaps, that might otherwise exist? I do really want to spend time focusing on veterans, as I said, because there's been a massive downsizing effort. And in the coming years, we know that over 250,000 service members will transition into civilian life annually. That's already underway. Many military families have children. About 44% of active duty folks and about 43% of Guard and Reserve folks have kids, so that's a pretty common experience. And what we also know is that younger veterans and service members are more likely to have young kids, right? So we're talking about lots of kids, but we're also talking about lots of families with pretty young kiddos, and that's important too. We know about challenges. I mentioned a little bit about this. This is data actually from a report that was done by the RAND Corporation in Illinois. And what's really, I think, important is it's also a Guard and Reserve state. So it's sort of a little bit more akin to the kinds of things that we're sort of managing. But folks, when they return, are facing high levels of unemployment, income, financial stresses, health and mental health needs. And it's not one constant. There are sort of populations within the population. So if we think, for example, about women veterans, something that is Tova's expertise, and she's been doing a lot of work in this area, we know that they face particular challenges as female veterans. They're much more likely to be low income, to be unemployed, and to have a young child at home, and to be single parenting. So really thinking about how do we provide outreach and support to some of these populations. And why do we want to do that? Well, I think, there are a lot of reasons, a lot of sort of humanitarian reasons, and we also know that behind every strong and resilient veteran is a strong and resilient family, that how our family is doing affects how we are doing. That's true for all of us. It's true for veterans as well. And so it really raises for us the question of how can we engage and support families to enhance their resilience and strength. So we spent a lot of time in Michigan interviewing, talking to, attending events to really get to know and learn from families about what it was that they perceived as their interests and needs, where were the things that were missing, what were they experiencing when they came back. And among the things that we did, we spent a lot of time going to yellow ribbon pre-deployment and reintegration weekends that were held basically as these folks who were in the Guard were either preparing to deploy or between 45 and 90 days post-demobilization on return. And we would go and we would listen to what family members had to say. And over time, we were invited to begin to offer what we referred to as our Welcome Back parenting groups that would facilitate discussion and sort of think about some strategies for helping with the transition back into the family life. And we also were able to partner with the Guard around doing some research and understanding what families were experiencing. And earlier I sort of shared with you, that we get a lot of focus about these two things in the media. It's like if I asked you, what do you hear most about in the media when you're talking about sort of folks who have served, it's like there's a lot of attention to mental health needs. And as a psychologist, I believe in that. I think that's really important to attend to. But I think it's also really occluding what are the much more common challenges that folks are experiencing. So common, in fact, as to be almost like the norm, right? And what these numbers sort of tell us are what are the percent of folks who meet what we think of as clinical thresholds on measures for marital stress and parenting stress, okay? And you can see it's like almost half. And for all of these things, it's also really important, and I hope jumping out at you, that it's not just the soldier, right? But it's also the spouse who's managing high levels of stress, high levels of stress around parenting and relationships. And this is important for so many reasons. I could spend a lot of time sort of unpacking just this one slide, but like one of the things that I really like to remember is that if we look at sort of the predictors of some of the things that we really want to prevent, the things that are sort of our most painful and sad outcomes like suicide, we know that relationship disruptions are one of the biggest single sort of predictors of those sorts of bad outcomes. And so this matters because it matters to people's daily quality of life. It also matters because if we really want to protect and support those who have served, we need to be addressing the things in real everyday life that are sources of stress and challenge. And I also just want to say, of course, parenting stress is a norm, and marital stress is a norm in sort of various ways, just if you're married or you have a kid, right? Like, there are things that we all struggle with. But you can really appreciate that when you're navigating, say, 15 months of separation and reintegration with young kids and some of the other challenges, it creates a special circumstance that warrants special attention and special support. And with that in mind, I mean, we do know that these things don't just go away. So sort of like the two quotes that I just shared with you from that woman who spoke, Beth, and also the quote from David Finkel, it doesn't just go away. So when we look at data on adjustment over time, return post-deployment, we actually see that symptoms kind of creep up over time. So we do want to think about how are we intervening to prevent that from occurring over time. Children also, as I said, are resilient, but they're at elevated risk. And I come from a department of psychiatry, so I'm going to wear my psychiatrist hat and just tell you that we do know some of the biggest predictors of behavioral problems in young kids and emotional and behavioral disorder. And the three sort of biggest predictors, other than genetics for certain particular disorders, are having a parent with mental health concerns, early separation from a parent or primary caregiver, and ongoing chronic life stress. Right? That probably doesn't surprise anyone. But you can really see this sort of trifecta that probably can impact a lot of families on their return and a lot of kids that they're sort of negotiating. I shared with you the 1 in 3 statistic, and that definitely is elevated risk. I always like to point out that means 2 in 3 aren't. So again, what can we learn about the resilience and also promote strengths and more positive outcomes for kids who are struggling? Because, and I like to sort of point this out, on a continuum from normative stress to traumatic stress, a lot of our families aren't necessarily in this zone. Some are experiencing traumas, but a lot of times I think what the families are navigating is the experience of big challenges, right? And those big challenges can take a toll. And they are emotionally costly, but our goal is to try and prevent it from getting here, to help them to manage this so that eventually they can return back to the normative stresses of being a family, of being a parent in life. Certainly coming home, as we hear stories from folks, brings joys, but it also brings challenges. And Tove actually did some work and published a paper focused on interviews with service members and veterans. These were dads in particular, and just a couple of quotes of the kinds of things that they described as challenges. This father said, "He was born and I was deployed before he was walking. And when I came home, he was standing, gripping on to his mother's leg, looking at me like, 'That's who?' That's a big sort of challenge to face, that kind of reconnect. And that's what the next father speaks to. When I came back, it was difficult, trying to find that closeness and trying to find that reconnect. So it's that experience that we're working to support and to address. I'm going to actually share with you a video, and I just want to give sort of a warning. Emotionally, this is a pretty emotional moment in the life of this family. So I invite you to sort of do what you need to take care of yourself in watching this. Stay with it, walk out. It's okay, whatever you need to do. And just be aware that usually there are people who have pretty strong feelings. I certainly do myself when I watch this. This is a moment of reunion. Has anyone ever seen the show In Their Boots? Is that familiar to you? Okay. It was a web series that was done that sort of described the experiences of service members and veterans. And this was one episode that followed this woman through her period of time, 15 months of separation from her husband. And he's returning. It sort of shows how she managed it with her kids and what it was like when he came home. And this is the moment of reuniting, of seeing one another again. So I'm going to just sort of share some thoughts about that because I think it's a very powerful moment in that. And there's a lot to see there. And I think one of the things when we watch this together with families in a group that we run, a lot of folks will say, "Yep, you know, that's how it was," or "That is how it felt." Sometimes the service member will say, "Well, you know, we were prepared for that, right? We were prepared because we had briefings on the way back, and they said, don't expect him to jump up into your arms and like hug you and kiss you right away, right? That's not how it's going to be." And all the other service members in the room, this one particular group that I was running, were saying, "Yep, we were prepared for that. We knew that it was going to take a little bit of time." And one mom, in this case, sort of piped up and said, "Well, we didn't," right? She was speaking to the experience of the spouses at home who didn't have the same level of preparation to sort of think about what might this be like, what can we expect? And I think in this video you can sort of see how much emotion is there for mom as she's really trying to hold so many things together and really facilitate that reconnect. And this dyad does such a beautiful job of that, don't they? Like they're just working together in sync to really sort of bridge the moment. And this is just a moment, right? So a lot of times when we're talking with folks, it's like, well, yeah, you see a lot of Hallmark moments. There are a million YouTube videos, right? It's like, oh, homecoming, reunion, here it is. Well, that's just the beginning of the story, right? Like that's the first 30 seconds. Now what? Now it's this whole longer process of really building to reconnect, of re-engaging into real life as together as a family. And so it can really help to facilitate some pretty powerful and good discussion about the process and also how they meet their child's needs Because when we introduce this in the groups that we run, we focus on what was it like for the parents, which is what we often sort of gravitate to first. And then we say, well, wait a second, let's now focus on the child. What's going on for him? And how are the parents helping sort of one another to meet his need for that process of reconnecting over time? So following deployment, there are a lot of transitions, a lot of moments, and a lot of new normals. We talk a lot about the new normal after you reintegrate. And it's going to be full of, it can sometimes be smooth sailing, joyful, happy, but it can also be bumpy and it can have potholes. And often whatever it is going to be, it's not like it was. And it's helpful to sort of know that. Building the reconnect takes time, patience, support, but it's also an opportunity to be the parent and the family that you really want to be, right? And to really support kids and one another through this journey. And really support that strength and resilience. We do know factors that promote strength and resilience in military families and in veterans. And things that are associated with strength and resilience include things like a strong military community, an identification with military life, and the availability of resources such as healthcare or family or social supports. But when we think about folks who are transitioning to civilian life, we also know that those are the very things that are often hardest to come by. So you lose access to the resources that were available to you on the installation. You know, for military folks, there is a very strong sense of community, of family, of esprit de corps that when you transition into civilian life can feel really hard to find or to re-engage. And if you've experienced that intensity of connection, you know, to go from that to not having it can be a pretty profound loss. Folks struggle with access to benefits, particularly for family members who may not have access to services through resources such as the VA. Jobs and employment become a different kind of challenge, but also, and this is I think really profound and can't be overstated, is the struggle to find identity after separation from service. That sense of, if I'm a Marine, then how do I sort of carry that into my life when I'm now also living life as a civilian in this community? It's been such a focal point of my entire existence. And just today, as we were working in a workshop, someone who was a military spouse said, well, I lost that identity too as a military spouse. When we disconnected from service, I was no longer in installation. And it was like, you know, it's not just the service member that has that transition, it's all of us. And there are barriers that get in the way of finding access to services and programs that I think as a whole community we can all really work on improving and bettering, if you will. And I think these include things like complex navigation. It's not that programs don't exist, but how do I find the right one? Like sometimes it's almost too many things that I can access. How do I actually find the right program or service? Geographic dispersion. Loss of eligibility for certain programs like new parent support programs that exist for folks on installation, access for spouses, kids, et cetera, for example, at the VA. And I just want to be really clear, the VA does amazing work. And so, you know, they're doing a lot to really meet a need. And yet there are limits to what they can provide and do provide. And so how do we as a community think about strengthening resources so that folks have access? And focus on health, how can we sort of focus on promoting health and wellness, not just on illness? And that's a big issue. So here's the slide with all the answers. Actually, it's a mandate for all of us to be creative and to think about how we can do this. Because I think what we need to be doing in our civilian roles, and I don't know how many folks here are in a situation or will be in the future, to begin thinking about, well, wait a second, how is what I'm doing actually reaching folks who have served or their family members? Can we develop and implement tailored strength-focused programs that will create access? Can we include kids and families and spouses into existing successful programs? Can we capitalize on the esprit de corps that exists, the strong sense of community to develop and implement peer-to-peer programs? We just held a national forum on that at the University of Michigan around peer-to-peer programs that are designed to serve everyone within this sort of space. And we heard about a lot of really innovative, exciting stuff that's happening nationally to really capitalize on that strength and build programs that meet needs, and then our work with strong families. So now I'm going to switch and tell you a little bit about that. We heard in our interviews and focus groups and meetings with families that they really did want support with parenting young kids, support across the deployment cycle. It's hard pre-deployment when you're preparing, it's hard during deployment, and it's hard when you come back. So support for each of those phases. And support not only for the service member or veteran, but also for the spouse, where everyone could come together, connect with other families, and get help with coping with life stresses and access to resources. So we basically adapted a program that we had developed to tailor it to be really, and it was a big tailoring, because this is there's a lot that's culturally really important in the military to attend to make sure that it's relevant to the lived experiences of families. The program is focused on young kids. It's focused on strengthening relationships, focused on the service member, veteran, and the parenting partner, whoever that parenting partner may be. And interestingly, in our groups, we have had, for example, grandmothers who who are parenting during the period of their daughter's deployment. We've had fiancés and other people who are, involved, and we welcome everyone in the family who is in a parenting or child role. And we really focus on mitigating the isolation by bringing families together, either over a 10-week group or in an intensive weekend version, which really helps facilitate access for families who are geographically dispersed and couldn't get to a common location for the 10-week period. And that's our Strong Military Families program. The program aims to strengthen parenting, reduce isolation, enhance self-care and stress reduction, and connect folks. And really what we're doing is helping strong families grow stronger and helping parents help their kids thrive. And the reason that we focus in this way is that we know that if you sort of look at all these positive outcomes here on the right side of this slide, we know that how you arrive at all those things, and I sort of ask you to look at it and think, if I have kids, or if I imagine having kids, what of these things do I want them to be able to do? And usually the answer is everything, all of it, to be resilient. We have decades of research that tell us that early relationships are the foundation for those developmental outcomes. And when we can strengthen early caregiving and relationships and family, then we can really help parents help their kids achieve what they dream for their kids. We also focus on young kids, as I said, because there are a lot of young kids in military and veteran families. It's the largest group, actually, of dependent children, kids under the age of 5. We focus on strengthening protective factors, so promoting parental resilience, enhancing social connections, helping families access concrete support and resources in times of need, job training opportunities, educational continuation, things that are important to help families thrive, enhancing parenting knowledge about kids, and promoting the social and emotional competence of young kids. And so we have a model that basically tries to address each of those 5 things. The program itself is very focused on skills building and experiential, so it is not come and listen to someone talk at you the way I'm doing right now. That's boring, right? So it's very experiential, and it's very much capitalizing on the group, so you have folks, it's always, one of the things I like to say is, it's nice to have a group because it's always easier to solve someone else's problem than your own, right? And parents sort of really offer that to one another, and it's great when families who have shared experience can sort of say, hey, I faced that, and this is what I tried, and it really worked, and so there's power in that. We focus our materials on young kids, but all kids in the family are welcome. And what we're doing is this integrated approach. We're really focusing on parenting, but we also build in pieces that enhance and strengthen mental health, including mindfulness, stress reduction skills, and other skills building that we practice in the group, which we think are partly responsible for why we see an effect of the intervention on things like depression and, in fact, PTSD symptoms as well, even though we never sort of talk about those kinds of things specifically. But we're really helping parents value the importance of self-care, because in order to meet your kids' needs, you actually have to meet your needs too, right? That's really important. The nuts and bolts I'm not going to get deeply into, but I just will say we try to make it as accessible as possible, and we always start with a meal because you got to break bread with one another to really sort of break into that comfortable space. And then we have classes for the parents and for the kids, separate, and they separate and they come back together, and we actually spend a lot of time thinking about how that happens and supporting them, because in a way it's kind of a mini modeling of separations and reunions that they've experienced in bigger ways. We do a shared family activity, and then we have goodbyes. So we have had the opportunity to deliver and implement and evaluate this model, and I could share actually a lot of data about that right now, but we're really excited to see that it's having an impact in some of the areas that we really hoped that it would, including things like reducing parenting stress, or reducing child risk indicators. So the things that we were hoping we would have an effect on, we're seeing we have an effect on. And we also have done this in the context of having a comparison group that did not get the intervention, as I've described, and we see that those changes really are only for those who participate in the multifamily group. We also have parents telling us that they feel more confident, and that matters too, right? Like they're saying, I feel more confident in helping my kids deal with feelings about deployment, or I know how I want to handle my child's feelings, not just about deployment, but about other things as well. So we're pretty happy that parents feel like they perceive a gain. And then the last sort of piece I want to share with you about our evaluation is actually about how families then work specifically together around experiences about deployment. So what does that mean? I know how I want to help my child handle feelings of deployment. What does that mean if you have really young kids? Well, we have an interesting task that we did with families, I think it's interesting, where we actually asked them to draw a picture about a happy sort of thing about being a military family and a hard thing about being a military family. And they can choose any story they want, and we videotape it, and then we code it afterwards because we're scientists, so that's what we do. And one of the things, and many things that we do, is we code how does the family sort of work together to facilitate the child's understanding of that experience. So is it possible to sort of tell a story that acknowledges happy times and hard times and includes the kids and sort of addresses feelings that exist in a way that supports kids making sense of their experience. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to share a video with you of a family after they participated. And I just have to say, I am so grateful to this family for sharing this, and they know that I am sharing it. And so that's hopefully obvious. But also I want to respect their sort of confidentiality. So if you recognize the person or something, please honor what they're sharing with us today. You won't understand or hear everything in this interaction. Don't worry about it. I guarantee you will be able to understand and hear some pretty important and key things as they're engaged in this drawing. And I will let you know that the service member is the dad in this family, and that there are 4 kids at the table with a 5th one on the way. Okay? So I hope you all caught enough of that. Did you hear when they were talking about the sad time, that there was a lot of discussion about what could that sad time be, right? And you don't always, I can't understand everything that's said, but at some point it gets said well, when I was born and you weren't there. Dad makes a little joke. He said, yeah, that was a real sad time for mommy, right? Kind of brings a little levity into it. But he doesn't undo the child's feelings. He kind of stays with, yeah, that was a real hard time, right? And they can then go on and proceed to sort of talk about that. And he sort of sticks with it. And the affect of the conversation doesn't get totally devastated, but it matches the reality of that experience, right? Like a real validation for the kids of yeah, that was part of the story. And then the very sweet one, I hope, caught this sort of, and how about a happy time? Did you hear what was said? When he came back again, right? And they draw a picture of both of those things. And that really, I think, says a lot about this family's resilience and ability to help their kids make sense. We also, sort of looking at data overall with the ones that have been coded so far, see that there's a stronger increase in families' ability to do exactly those kinds of things following participation in the group. So what are our next steps? We're continuing to think about how to increase access and remove barriers. Like I said, our weekend adaptations. How can we use social media to help strengthen sort of family connections after participating in the group? We're thinking about partnerships. So Tova's leading a charge around thinking, for example, about partnering with Team RWB in developing family champions within the context of other successful programs. And we're thinking about dissemination and implementation. So go Wisconsin team. We hope this will be a resource that's available to folks in your community too. So as I'm ending, I just want to sort of share thoughts, hopefully my take-home messages you feel like I achieved. It is important that we are aware of the growing number of veterans and families transitioning out of service, and that we do what we can to reduce the isolation, parenting stress, and build connections. Because when we do that, it's not just a one-generation impact. It's a multiple generation impact leading forward. We're strengthening families and we're strengthening the next generation. And really to think creatively about how do you bridge the divide? How do you connect civilians and veterans? How do you support veteran-to-veteran programs? How do you connect families to families to really capitalize on esprit de corps and provide the support and connection that helps everyone thrive? I have to acknowledge I have a lot of collaborators who make this work possible, but most importantly, of course, all the families who have participated and shared so generously of their experience, and also the funders who have made the work possible. And I'm going to close on this slide with an email address that says, if I've piqued your curiosity, if you're interested in some of what I've shared, I hope you'll reach out. I hope that's okay, Tova. I hope you'll reach out to Tova and let her know so that she can help connect you to what's happening, at least around strong families here in Wisconsin. So I will stop there. Thank you.